Good morning and welcome to the Yukon in Focus Rocks to Riches Breakfast. It's nice to see so many people here so early in the morning. I'd like to start by saying that we're gathered here on the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Ishnabeg, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, Wendat nations, and that Toronto is now home to many diverse First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people. We have a very special guest here today who I would like to invite up to say a few words. The Yukon Minister of Energy, Mines, and Resources, the Honorable Ted Laking.
Great. Thanks, Jasmine, and thanks, everybody, for hosting me this morning. Jasmine confirmed I have a 30-minute speech, so get ready and be quiet. Don't eat during this. I'll be really quick. Several of you were probably here yesterday evening. Some of you were probably at Roundup as well. The main message that I want to leave with this group is that our government is very pro-mining and pro-investment. We're trying everything within our power to increase the predictability and the certainty for your industry. A couple of the things that I think are quite exciting that we announced yesterday is that we are creating a new branch in the Department of Energy, Mines and Resources focused on major mine development and critical minerals that will provide clear permitting pathways for your projects to get to the finish line. The other thing that we are doing is we're bringing in a Deputy Minister's Oversight Committee to help navigate these things through all the respective departments so things don't get lost in the system. And so I don't want to take too much more of your time because I know we have some great talks, but those are some of the things that I wanted to leave you with today is that we're doing things a little bit differently now, and we're trying to get your projects built. And so the Major Mines branch I'm very excited about. Several of the projects in the room that I see represented, we've already kind of identified you as early adopters of this new system, and so we're excited to sit down with you over this week and work with you on those projects. So with that, thank you and enjoy your breakfast.
So just a quick thing. Today's schedule will be, we'll have our two moderators up here talking about the Yukon, which will be followed by a fireside chat with our CEOs, followed by about a 20-minute question and answer period so you can have your questions ready for them. I would like now to invite up our two moderators. We've got Michael Gray from Agentis Capital. We've got two analysts, actually, who are moderators. So Michael Gray from Agentis Capital, who is a partner there, and Managing Director of Canaccord, Peter Bell. Thank you.
Well, that was good news. Thank you, Minister Laking, for breaking the ice. And those are really good initiatives. And I think our sector just actually wants to see it happen and that velocity of permitting increase. So got a few slides to start off to set the context. Maybe we can have the first slide come up. So the Yukon and Global Focus. This isn't the Tombstone Gold breakfast of previous years. It was branded a little bit different. There's a critical minerals company now involved. It's not just the Tombstone Gold Belt. And I think we could all agree, unless you have really been introduced to the Yukon the first time, that it really is in global focus as a jurisdiction. This has really been happening since about 2022, and I would argue on the back of the Snowlines Valley discovery. Would you agree, Peter?
Totally.
Okay. So let's look at a few images, forward-looking statements. This is information only. There's no recommendations being made in this presentation. I'm going to have to turn and see this, but this is in 2012, the Northern Cordillera gold and copper belt. You can see the Golden Triangle lower there in BC. You can see the Yukon and then into Alaska. Alaska had 6 seniors. Yukon had 0. In BC, they kind of had 2, okay? Galore Creek. Fast forward to 2025, you can see the number of seniors in BC up by 7, $5 billion worth of M&A. The Yukon, there's 6 strategic investments, et cetera, just under $1 billion of M&A. And Alaska lost 1, and there wasn't a lot of M&A, 0.4. So the Yukon has gained tremendous momentum in terms of activity on multiple fronts. Let's look at the financing from 2022 to 2025, because I think that's really when things started. The light blue is the Yukon. And these are equity financings only. These aren't exploration expenditures. You can see the trajectory of the Yukon going from 136 million in 2022 all the way to 400 plus. I think it's about 408 last year as a record. So a huge amount of exploration capital coming into the Yukon and driven by other discoveries being made and those strategic investments from various senior mining companies basically endorsing the Yukon as jurisdiction. And very importantly, what's happened, this is circa January 25 to January 26. I didn't update it for 1 year, this period, but you can see in blue the Yukon basket of stocks at the bottom, pretty well every junior exploration company in the Yukon. Overall, it's up 300% versus the GDXJ at 200%. That's spectacular, right? I don't know, Peter, is there another jurisdiction with that type of performance and torque?
Not in this cycle, I don't think. And one of the things I've said this before, and I'll point it out again, but I've done kind of project evaluation work for Newmont, for a hedge fund for a long time, in investment banking as an analyst, and I had up till 2023, the beginning of 2023, I'd only been to the Yukon once, and I've been there 14 times since. So yeah. I think that tells you something about the momentum of the Yukon and the kind of activity and interest that people have in what's going on there right now.
Yeah, in furious agreement. I think that helps set the stage. We're going to proceed to invite our presenters up. I think Peter's going to be there. I'm going to be here. Can we have Tara, Sandeep, Rob, and Tim come up, please? Thank you. Oh, that's me. Thank you. Yeah, it is a little. Get your water. So what's going to happen is we're going to have each company's CEO come up and present 3 to 5 minutes, really a hard-hitting, high-impact summary of their company. Probably have one burning question or two. Next, we'll go right down the line, and then we're going to have a chance for a little bit more broader discussion, hopefully lots of Q&A from the audience. There's a few people out here I'll probably pick on, Peter as well. And I think we've got another, is the clock running on our session? We'll have you out of here by 9 o'clock, easily. So I want to introduce and welcome Tara Christie. Probably doesn't need a great introduction from the majority of people here. She'll introduce herself, and Tara, you got 3 to 5 minutes.
Okay, I thought it was just 3, so I get an extra 2. Wow, that's great.
Okay.
I might stand
You're
up.
welcome to stand.
So you're looking at our projects, Banyan Gold. I'm the president and CEO, I guess I should say that. Became the president in 2016. We acquired this asset in 2017. And we made our discovery under the power line, just near that substation beside the highway in 2019. And now we are sitting with almost 8 million ounces, so 2.2 million ounces of indicated and 5.4 million ounces of inferred. And we're just about to update that resource. And Michael sort of set the context of this region. The other really important thing is just how much metals we have discovered. Right around us, over 25 million ounces in resources. In recent years, that's grown very, very significantly, with particularly in the Tombstone Belt, these reduced intrusion type deposits. And of course, we haven't found our intrusion. Here's our project now, 720 square kilometers. You can see the hydro dam. It's just 5 kilometers off the bottom of our property boundary. We have Hecla on our northern boundary, and of course, the Eagle Gold mine has an existing resource there and a 200,000 ounce previously heap leach producer. Here's our resource, at a 0.3, that a very substantial resource, but at a 0.55 cutoff, almost 4.55 million ounces at a gram. Looking at our deposit, you can see our high-grade starter pits there in pink and red. Our most recent deep hole high-grade mineralization right down at depth, almost 350 meters, and 15-gram material. That's pretty exciting. Our airstrip deposit, we're following up on that high grade where we intersected, 16 grams or 16 meters of 9 grams in a high-grade zone that we hadn't drilled on since 2020. We put 50% of our drilling into that last year. The power line deposit, again, continues to grow. We haven't found edges of either deposit. The bulk of the deposit is only 200 meters deep, and we found that deep mineralization again. Our silver mineralization was a new discovery from 2021. We had a couple holes, but last year we really followed up on it. When you only have 1 or 2 holes, back in 2021, it didn't all hold together. We've now had 18 intersections and found what we think are 6 distinct veins in 3 zones. And yes, it cross-cuts our gold mineralization, but very high grade, 10,000 grams per ton, 14,000 grams per ton, and within a broader interval of, 100 meters of 300 grams. Very, very similar to the ore that's being mined at Hecla's Keno Hill mine that's just 7 kilometers down the road. So some potential for early cash flow, optionality on how we process that, certainly since there's capacity at that mill. So, what are we doing? We still have results from last year. Yes, we'll have almost 75 more holes to come from our last year's drilling, and we'll get those here by the end of the month. We're going to update our mineral resource in the second quarter, and that will be used as the basis of our PEA in the second half. So maiden economics, we're pretty excited about that. We think there's some external catalysts around. The sale of the Eco Gold Mine, I think, will be important. We've already started our drill program this year. We'll have 5 drills turning in March, a 40,000 meter program on Ormac, and additionally another 10,000 meter on our regional targets in our Highland project, which also has an existing resource. The news that we put out yesterday, but which was announced on Thursday, I think has really set us up for a new valuation. That Franco-Nevada purchased that royalty from Victoria Gold, which was a 6% royalty that can be bought down to 1% for a $10 million payment. There's no timing on that payment, and they paid $52.2 million for that. So where does that put us in terms of what Franco-Nevada, which is one of the preeminent royalty companies around, thinks of our value? So, looking at where we're trading at about $50 US an ounce, I think we've got lots of room to really add some value for our shareholders and show people that we're worth more than what Franco paid for that, because they paid a discount. So that's my spiel, and I'm really looking forward to this year. Banyan's going to have a lot of news to deliver, and we want to be one of Yukon's next gold mines.
Fantastic. Peter, burning question?
Sure. I know that over the past, I'm not exactly sure when you made the switch, but you started really focusing on the high grade and versus the bulk tonnage part. You always had a pretty eye-opening resource, but now you've really understood the geology better and understand the sweet spots and so on. As the metal price though is higher now, how do you balance size, which people might now want, versus grade, which maybe they were more focused on a year ago or so?
So last year, our drill program was really focused on economics, right? And the key change on that high grade was our new geological model, which went into our updated resource, which could be terrifying when you're changing your geological model to a new lithologically constrained resource. But what it's meant, and we've seen it come clearly out in our drill program, is that we understand where these high grade zones are going, and they're coming together where we want them to. We're defining starter pits with these higher grades, so that's very exciting. So yes, the challenge of balancing growth and scale with defining the project and advancing is that's something that we have to balance. We hear from one major told me, Tara, 10 million ounces isn't too big. Don't worry about drilling it out to indicated. And then there's others that, no, we want to be able to see you advance this project, drill it out to indicated, get some measured, really just focus on getting the project to PFS and FS. So that is something that this year's program will have a little bit of both. We're certainly going to continue to convert to indicated, focusing on those high-grade zones. But there's some really important step-out targets, which I think will show the regional potential, both on our property and the 10 other targets that we've identified from our geochem and geophysics on the broader property. So we're going to do a bit of both. About 20% is going to go into regional and step-out. So 5% has to go into condemnation drilling, because we've got to find some places for some infrastructure. We weren't successful on that. We found more mineralization where we were going to put a waste rock down. So yeah, it's problems to have.
So I have one follow-on from that, and this relates to your PEA. And I've had the challenge of running a junior actually at one time and putting out a study. And one of the things that you have to grapple with is maximizing NPV versus having a capital number that you think people can digest. Now that the market is quite different than it was, in the past, how do you think about that kind of capital constraint part of the study? People don't like putting out big capital numbers, but there's arguably a lot more capital available now than there ever has been.
Well, I think this is a PEA too. It's
Yeah,
not
of
our
course.
final design on what we're going to do. And I think people are pretty aware that you can always do the optionality of starting small, scaling up like an Artemis, but you should present a project which might also be the optimal project for the area, because that, and for us, that's probably, the 35,000 plus tons per day, where you do get a pretty optimal PEA, because there is capital around. And yes, as you move forward, if you're going to actually build it, you in our FS will have the opportunity as well to design a project if we think we're going to build it. And I think, what are the odds that somebody's not going to come in that's going to want a big project? This is a huge resource. It's going to be, that mill, once it's built, it's going to run for a very long time, and it's going to generate lots of tax dollars for the Yukon and employ a lot of people and start a lot of businesses and make a lot of First Nations wealthy. So that might be the optimal project for this area.
Maybe briefly, could you go back and just talk about, it was a bit of a game changer in terms of interpretation of the geological model and Henry Marsden's involvement, just to give that insight to everyone in terms of the way it's now being looked at? Controls?
Yeah, so in 2024, we got Henry on board to help us with targeting.
Ex-Yamana Vice President of Exploration.
Yeah, and certainly, we went through drill hole by drill hole, looking at lithologies, trying to understand, and spent like 3 days going through it, trying to understand what the model was, and then our 2025 program was based on that. And then hired Duncan Mackay in February of 2025. Also ex-Yamana, so had worked with Henry before and had that rigor of understanding our drill program. And so that really was a big part of not only changing the model for the mineral resource, but then also executing on it for the drill program that we did in 2025. And having somebody, other geologists who've come to site have also been really, like John Robbins, when he made 2 site visits last year, he was pretty excited about it. So I feel there's been quite a few people that have now put their eyes on our new model and are comfortable with it. And we saw, our share price increase with our new geological model, because there were quite a few people that were like, yeah, we don't quite think you got it. But I think that we're showing it, and wait to see with our new mineral resource. So, yeah. But it was a big change for us, and it's been very successful.
Okay, thank you, Tara. Great. Sandeep, Western Copper and Gold.
Sure, am I next?
Yes, you're up to bat.
Sandeep Singh, President and CEO of Western Copper and Gold. Pleasure to be with you. Thanks for organizing, to Tara and Jasmine and the team that helped put this together. Thank you so much. As the tagline suggests, we're advancing Canada's largest critical minerals project. Not a bad time to be advancing Canada's largest critical minerals project. The backdrop for our project, and I will be perhaps making some forward-looking statements, never been better. This is a project that needed certain things to come together, and I joined the company 2 years ago through the lens looking at this project again, that those things were coming together or had come together, and it was the right time to be pushing this important project forward. As I said, one of the largest, sitting on roughly 11 billion pounds of copper, 21 million ounces of gold, a lot of molybdenum and silver on top of that, which in and of themselves would be company makers, but are our third and fourth kind of components of value. Quite advanced, a recent feasibility study that was done in 2022, which showed very good economics then when you plug in more recent long-term prices for gold and copper and silver, et cetera, phenomenal economics. It shows an NPV, I'll show it to you in a second, pushing $10 billion, which is quite remarkable. Also been endorsed by some of the smarter names in the copper space. Rio Tinto is a sub 10% shareholder. Mitsubishi Materials owns just around 5%, both on our technical committee, lending us a tremendous amount of support and access to some of the best minds in the sector. And to Tara's point, having the ability to bring some of that other talent from external sources in however you do it, very, very valuable to smaller companies such as ourselves, and they've been tremendously involved and helpful. I mentioned the backdrop, not just for our metals, but also for critical minerals and mining in the country. I think it's been a 180-degree change, frankly, in the last several years, starting in Ottawa and then everywhere. I think in the Yukon, there's always been support for mining. It's nice to see that continue and frankly, step forward. So I think from both those jurisdictional perspectives, quite a lot of tailwind, which is excellent. And now we're advancing finally through our environmental assessment process. We submitted our ESE in the fall, and we're taking those first few steps with our regulator and our affected First Nations. This is an interesting slide. We think it's an interesting slide. So we've got the size, we're advanced, we're in the right location. There's a lot of things that go towards the simplicity of this project, but this dynamic I think is an important one to focus on. And what we've done here is we've thrown ourselves up against really the whole complex of copper gold developers. We've also juniors for instance, and then we've also thrown some larger projects in the hands of bigger companies, and we show our metrics both during both kind of life of mine, so the life of mine average, and then in the early years where we pay back quite quickly. And if you look at the life of mine bars, a grade that is middle of the pack, but a strip ratio that is the best in the world as far as anything we can access and find. And grade certainly matters in any mining situation, and ours is good. But the larger the project gets, the bigger your earth-moving operation, the more the strip ratio matters as well. And you have to look at these two things together, I think it's fair to say. And on a strip-adjusted basis, to have a strip-adjusted grade that is at the top of that list, akin to Reko Diq, which Barrick is advancing in Pakistan, having a Reko Diq in Canada, I think is a pretty good situation. And that leads to these economics. This is the output of our 2022 feasibility study that I was referring to earlier. When we did that fees, we were using pricing in the top left, which now seems quite stale. $360 copper, $1,700 gold, $22 an ounce silver. You can put yourself wherever you want to be on this page, but I think shows you the torque of these types of projects that work and work just fine in that low case scenario, but have a huge amount of optionality to rising prices. So a very valuable project given the market cap of our company today is about $1 billion Canadian with roughly $135 million in cash. So well funded towards our significant milestones ahead. Also worth pointing out, without getting too geeky about it, the NPV in this math at an 8% discount rate only really values the first dozen years of our mine life, give or take. Everything after that just gets melted away from a discounting perspective in the math, in the NPV calculation, but those years matter. This is a 27-year phase one mining scenario using a third of our current drilled out resources, so the potential for it to extend beyond that is obvious and real, but quite compelling that we can show this type of NPV, IRRs in the 40s, which is unheard of in big projects, and an exceptionally quick payback. So a lot of things coming together, including the infrastructure, which perhaps we'll talk about, and the Grid Connect concept, which was a concept a decade ago, now moving forward in leaps and bounds. And I think we have an important part to help drag abundant and clean energy to the Yukon, to the benefit of all Yukoners and probably many of these projects as well. So that is us. Thank you very much.
Peter? Sure. So I don't cover you, but I do know the story, and I do cover some things in the Yukon, and I want to ask a couple of questions that people always ask me about Yukon projects. Not necessarily the ones I would ask, but I'm just curious about what your response would be. The first one, I'll just ask two of them. The first one, you mentioned the potential grid connect, and one of the things people always ask me, they say, well, the project seems great, but it's going to cost a fortune to mine up there. So
Yeah.
that's like a kind of broad. And then the second one relates to permitting. Actually, that's a less specific one. I'll leave that one for now. And the third one, though, and I know that you might have some insight on this, is people always ask me. They say, "Okay, this is a great project. Rio's in there. Why haven't they bought it yet?" So just on M&A timing, but maybe first, if you could just address the kind of cost delta that, without getting too far ahead of yourself, how people might think about that rather than necessarily specific number.
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to answer your question specifically. If it's about infrastructure per se, or the cost of running an operation in the Yukon?
People's broad perception is that things are impossibly expensive in the Yukon, and these are generally people who didn't buy a stock and are mad that they missed out, and now they want to find an excuse for why they were right.
Yeah.
So that's obviously things are more expensive in remoter places with more difficult weather conditions. But I guess what I'm trying to get to is, and a way maybe to think about it is, what would be the potential impact of the grid connect, which you pointed out in terms of that, because that would take away some of that stuff.
Sure, and look, I mean, I think, so I understand your question better, Peter, thank you. I would say certainly what's held back the Yukon and a lot of projects from being mines in the Yukon has been infrastructure historically. That is changing. I wouldn't say it's changed, but it's certainly changing. With every success, every new discovery, everyone kind of pushing the boundaries, I think that improves for the benefit of everyone. When it comes to, I think it all boils down to what is the prize. Like, yes, perhaps there's some challenges. There are no easy places to mine left in the world, but does the prize warrant the effort? And I think you're looking at names on this stage and others in the room and in the Yukon who have delineated some pretty interesting projects, and in particular over the last several years. Ours was around earlier. It took a step change forward with commodity prices and growth, but you got to have a prize that is worthy of the challenge. When it comes to us specifically, with a big copper gold porphyry like we have, world class in scale, what I describe to people is infrastructure is a challenge for every single one of these projects in the world. There might be 7 or 8 in the world that are relevant, I think, and real in the hands of junior companies, not already in a major, and they all have their challenges. I would suggest to you, we get a lot of questions about infrastructure and the challenges that come from it, but I would much rather have our basket of challenges than trying to build one of these projects in the high Andes at 4,000 meters, 4,500 meters of elevation plus, still with those same infrastructure challenges, except in that case, lacking oxygen as well. So I think there are no easy projects left anywhere in the world. Partly why you're seeing commodity prices where they're at. I think commodity prices will continue for copper and gold to reflect that lack of projects, because there's just nothing to fill the gap. So again, that's a little bit of hopefully answering your question. Infrastructure is improving. Every one of our successes helps the rest of the mining sector in the Yukon and Yukoners as a whole. A lot of the infrastructure, I mean, I'm new to the Yukon, but I'm sure Tara would agree with me. Much of the infrastructure in the Yukon already is the byproduct of mining. And so I think there's another phase that can help kind of push that forward. In terms of where we are as a company, look, we also have to be ready to transact. I think ultimately we've been pretty clear that we're not builders of this mine. It needs a bigger group or a small consortium to do it. The breadcrumbs of that are kind of in our shareholder base today, but there are other folks that we talk to. We want to de-risk the project to move it along, start to go through this environmental assessment process. We think there's a lot of value to unlock in doing that. We look around at some of our peers who are trading at 2-3 times our market cap for projects that we think are very similar to ours. We owe it to our shareholders to go get some of that value. So it's a function of, I spent most of my life in mining M&A. I would suggest to you that the big companies will pay more for less risk. Yes. And we are in a pretty important de-risking phase. So I think those paths ultimately cross. The other thing I would say, and hopefully you guys would agree with me, because you track the sector well, we haven't seen a lot of development company M&A in the copper space. Everyone's focus has been on buy versus build. Anything that was producing got bought. We've seen some mega mergers, some work, some not. But anything on the producing side that was there, largely bought. That also doesn't create more copper. It just pushes copper around into bigger entities. We as a society need to build more copper. But that phase does come, and whilst it was the right idea back then, our capital intensity, like many projects out there, is about $20,000 a ton of copper equivalent produced per annum. The producers are now trading at $40,000, $50,000, $60,000 a ton of copper production. So it's no longer cheaper to buy than to build. So I think it's just a combination of we have some work to do to create value. The space will do what the space does, but we are certain that we have one of the better copper, in our case, copper gold stories in the space. And everyone in the copper space wants copper. Everyone that gets to a certain size in the gold space wants copper. So we think there's a good answer there for our shoulders in the future.
Sandeep, can you just touch on the port too, the importance of the Skagway port?
Yeah, look, I think when I think about infrastructure for us, it's road, which is arguably not that complex. The Port of Skagway, which is where concentrate has historically been shipped out of the Yukon, where we expect it to get shipped out in the future. And as Michael points out, there's been good progress led by the Yukon government in terms of clearing out access for all Yukon projects, and the Yukon as a whole. So that's going through kind of permitting phases as we speak in terms of baseline infrastructure on which further infrastructure will sit in the future. So that's taken a step forward. And then we each hinted at it, but the Grid Connect, that's a pretty huge piece of work. Our project works exceptionally well. All those economics you saw earlier are driven off of an LNG base case, but as the Grid Connect story continues to evolve, and far from a foregone conclusion, but as it continues to evolve, that's a pretty good game changer for our project. It's essentially another $1 billion of value on top of those numbers, and then turns our copper into green copper, which I would argue, if there are 7 or 8 things in the world that matter, I would argue that, and we're an important one of 7, I would argue that puts us at the top of the list as it fleshes out.
Very good. Thank you, Sandeep. Let's move on to Tim Warman, new kid on the block as far as a developer, future producer. Take it away, Tim.
Thanks, Michael. Thanks, everyone. As Michael said, I'm Tim Warman. I'm the CEO of Fuerte Metals. As many of you saw, we purchased the coffee project, the Coffee Gold project in the Yukon from Newmont Corporation in September of last year. We made the announcement, and we are diving in on it. That's a nice picture of the Yukon and the camp, or the laydown yard in July when the fireweed is blooming. It doesn't look quite like that now. I think the report from camp this morning was it's minus 45. Quick forward-looking statement. So just a couple of things here. One of the things that really attracted us to the coffee project, and as many of you know, coffee was advanced and discovered by Kaminak, bought by Goldcorp in 2016, and then really kind of disappeared behind that corporate veil for about 10 years. And I think a lot of people were under the impression that the project had just been warehoused. And so when it came up for divestment by Newmont, it started initially in 2024, I think people thought, nothing's really been done on this project. It's going to be a lot of work. And anyway, I think we thought the same thing. And when we actually looked at the project and got into the data room, what we realized was that between Goldcorp and Newmont, they had spent something like $300 million advancing that project, and not just on a technical basis. I mean, they did 300,000 meters of drilling. They did all kinds of engineering. They advanced, but more importantly, was they advanced the permitting, and they got it through the initial YESIB screening. They got that in 2022. They applied for the the territorial licenses, the quartz mining license and the water license in late 2023. So those permits have already been more than 2 years in the permitting process. And what we saw was a project that, rather than just having been warehoused, was actually very, very close to the point at which we could make a production decision on it. So nearing the end of the permitting process, really, really importantly, Newmont had done an excellent job at building relationships with the key First Nations. So there are IBAs in place with the 2 key First Nations, the Trondequetchin and the White River First Nation, and good relationships with some of the other neighboring First Nations. And so our goal is to be in a position by roughly this time next year to make a production decision and begin construction of what we think will be Yukon's next mine. A couple of the things we're doing this year to advance towards that construction decision and make it easy to begin construction are, we want to start completing the access road from Dawson City. At present, the only way to get anything that can't fit on an airplane to site is on a barge down or up the Yukon River, but by this time next year, We should be able to drive into the site at least by a winter road. We're just waiting on some final permits to get going on that, but we are literally ready to start building that rest of that road. Most of that road exists actually today as placer mine access roads, and we just have a couple of bits to actually finish in on the bottom and then approve a bit more of the road. So that's one of the things we're going to be doing. The other thing we're going to be doing is putting in our construction camp, so that obviously if you're going to start building a mine, people need places to stay. So we've got a construction camp that we've identified. We're going to be setting that up at site this summer. And then also building a new runway. The current runway is short. We need a bigger runway that can handle longer planes. And we're permitted to do all of this stuff, by the way. We're also going to do about a 40,000 meter drill program. The guys are actually opening up the camp right now, and that drilling program should be starting in a couple of weeks. But one of the things that we really wanted to do quickly was to give people a sense of what's the value of this project right now. You know, we're doing a feasibility study. That's going to be done by the end of the year, but we wanted something sooner than that. So we put a PEA out last week, and I only have 2 slides. This is some of the headline numbers from the Coffee Gold Project PEA. And don't think that the FS is going to look terribly different from this, because this was based basically on feasibility level engineering that's been done by Newmont. $2.3 billion NPV after tax at current gold price, at long-term consensus gold prices, which is about $3,600 an ounce. If you take spot a few weeks ago, about $4 billion, 2.8 million ounces recovered, 217,000 ounces over the 14-year life of mine. For a gold mine, this is a very long-lived mine, and given the size of the exploration concession there, we've got 70,000 hectares of 40-kilometer long project concession belt along the major controlling structure in the area. We think that's going to be just the tip of the iceberg. There's lots and lots of exploration potential there. But just focusing in on this, the first 5 years, we produce almost 250,000 ounces a year, and that produces very quick capital payback. For a heap leach operation, this is incredibly high grade. That's something that's very important to note, is we don't need a mill. This is a low capital intensity, low energy intensity open pit heap leach, just has a crusher and an ADR plant, will be self-generating power, and it only uses about 11 megawatts of power. So it's quite low power consumption, so we can easily generate that on site. But you look at the all-in sustaining cost, under $1,300 sustaining cost, and that generates very high margins, very quick payback. Capital intensity, about under $1 billion Canadian. We think we can bring that down a bit. There's a lot of contingency in there at PEA level as we go forward. So a very exciting time. Again, we hope to be beginning construction on what should be the Yukon's next mine by about this time next year. Thank you.
Great.
I should know this, but I'm going to ask it anyway. This study that you just put out, how does it differ from the previous one? What's been the value add of the money that's gone into the ground beyond the permitting?
Yeah. So I mean, if you go back to 2016, the most recent study is 10 years old. So obviously the costs are stale. I think it was done at $1,100 gold or something like that. So, and it was done, look, it was good work, but it was done by a junior to sell the company, and it worked. And so I think what we did is we looked at this and said, we're planning to build this thing. This is the plan on this thing. So, how do we make that different? And so a bunch of things have gone into that. Firstly, the resource is much, much better defined. So when Kaminak sold the project, they had 300,000 meters of drilling. There's now over 600,000 meters of drilling on it. There are over 100 column tests, so we know the metallurgy extremely well. I mean, we've seen mines built off 30 column tests. There are over 100 here. They did a whole round of column tests in a refrigerated locker to see if cold weather had any impact on it. The amount of engineering that's gone into this is incredible. So, and even in terms of, how recent the price quotes are, these are all based off actual vendor quotes. So, this is kind of a funny PEA. It's really a kind of snapshot of our feasibility that'll be out at the end of the year. So, we're pretty confident with these numbers on it. So, yeah, it's just a lot higher level of confidence in just about everything about the project.
Okay, and then you mentioned the mine life, and what's the ability, it doesn't need to be way shorter, but what are kind of the constraints on the ability to produce at a particular rate? And is that mine limited or capital limited, or?
You mean in terms of the production rate? Yeah. it's the deposit is it's an interesting deposit because, some deposits, if you change the gold price assumptions, the deposit inflates and contracts like a balloon. Coffee is very structurally constrained, and you're pretty much in the ore or you're out of the ore. And so what we saw is, we just did it as a thought experiment. We raised the cutoff grade to a gram. I mean, this thing is, the average grade of it at the 0.18 cutoff grade is about 1.15 grams per ton, so very high for a heap leach project. If you raise that cutoff grade all the way to 1 gram, you still have 2.1 million ounces of M&I. It just isn't really all that affected. So, I mean, the deposit kind of is what it is, and so trying to crab the mining rate up is a bit challenging. You just end up with too many fronts, trying to put too much stuff through at the time. So I think what we found is a sweet spot.
Okay, now you made me ask another question, because I'm just thinking about Banyan now, and I'm thinking about your grade. Is there a mill scenario here?
Yeah, everybody asks that, why are you putting this on a heap leach when it's those kind of grades? There's two things about that. One is the heap leach recoveries are incredibly high. So the average of the column tests for the oxide material is 87% recovery, which is incredibly high for a heap leach gold mine. I mean, I've run heap leach gold mines in Nevada where you're happy with 65%. So the differential, that delta between, a heap leach and a mill, you just don't have that huge gain to justify the extra capital. At these gold prices, maybe that's less true. Maybe you want every gram of gold. The other one, though, is this project is so far along the permitting process that, yes, we could go back to the drawing board and design it with a mill and a thing if we wanted to go back in time 5 years and do it then. But to do it today would be, the lost opportunity is just not worth it.
Okay, and then one final question, a kind of selfish one, but I'm curious about this. Because you mentioned the average recovery, but I'm always interested in the range of recoveries too. Do you get into lower recovery material at the back end of the mine life that might benefit from a mill and a different
absolutely. So, I mean, this is like a lot of oxide deposits where, the deeper you go in the deposit, you get into transition ore, and then there's different levels of transition ore. And then finally, we believe there's a sulfide ore body beneath this that there's a couple of drill holes into, but really like half a dozen holes into that sulfide ore body. So that's a whole other upside we see. But yes, as you get deeper in the deposit, you're getting into stuff that gets lower recoveries. Now, the interesting thing is there's lots more oxide targets in the immediate area. So what I suspect is going to happen is that as you get towards that deeper stuff, you're never going to put that on the heap leach. You're going to be displacing that from the mine plan by finding other near surface oxide material. Because you've got to remember, like, this stuff outcrops at surface. This isn't buried under some kind of deep overburden. It literally comes to surface. So yeah, I think as you go through the mine life, as you keep drilling and expanding the deposit, that production profile and what's going on in the heap leach is going to change over time.
Okay, thanks.
Tim, you've had experience in Nevada running a heap leach operation. Maybe, if I remember correctly, I think the coffee mineralization leaches in like 2 weeks, like 80% or something like that. Can you compare that to?
Yeah, I was actually just looking at the leach curves the other day. So in the oxide material, you're getting to about 70% recovery after about 32 days. I mean, it really is quick. And I remember somebody asked me, why has it got such good leach characteristics? And I mean, honestly, I'm a geologist. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Rob Carpenter, this was your baby, coffee, so you must be really proud and excited to be back in the Yukon.
Yeah, flashbacks for sure. It's a great project, and the leach kinetics I think are great because the sulfide is so fine grained, and that it just turns into orange dust. There's so much surface area exposure, so it's an ideal candidate.
Yeah,
sure.
So Prospector, Rob Carpenter.
Thanks, guys. So Prospector Metals is very much at the earlier or the discovery phase of the cycle. 2025 was our first year of drilling. We drilled about 6,000 meters. And to give you an idea, in 2026, we're going to do 4 times that amount. We're going to do about 25,000 meters of drilling. So we had some very significant discoveries in 2025. And the idea now is to try to advance those in that investment thesis for the next couple of years. Our team is here at the PDAC, and we're at the Core Shack. Whenever you have a new discovery, a new project, there's always lots of questions. What does the rock look like? How does the grade look? Please come by, meet the team, look at the rocks, look at the sections. It's a great opportunity, and all of our team is there. Again, lots of early stage questions about grade and everything, and the questions that people have are, like how continuous is it? How big can it be? And so we take great effort to put all of our technical data on our website and disclose as much as we can. People want to know about the continuity of the grade. They want to know about the potential intricacies of the mineralogy. And we get some really good questions from folks. So please take a look at our website. The information is all there. And if there's things you think we can be disclosing better, then by all means let us know. People, projects, and corporate structure, the three pillars of investment in junior mining. Our team has been lucky enough to be through the discovery process in Yukon, and what we learned was you need the right project, and we need the kind of project that has scale, because we're in a remote jurisdiction. We need a big deposit. By definition, we're looking at every project on this panel here is in the 1% of all projects globally. So you need to find big projects. But how do you discern moose pasture from a potential mine? One is the scale and the footprint, whether it be geochemistry or whether it be structural analysis. And one thing, there's no textbook on the geology of the Yukon, right? So we're making this up as we go. And what we've learned as a group, I think in the last 10 years, is the importance of structural geology. And that's what's focusing the higher grade portions in all of these different deposits. So you look for that structural component, you look for that footprint, you look for near surface, you look for good metallurgy early on. And we're very picky with the type of projects that we take on because we know what doesn't work, right? And this project, ML, fit that bill, and we acquired it in 2025 and drilled our first holes. We're fortunate enough to have B2 Gold as a strategic investor. I would recommend them as a partner to anybody. They're great in the boardroom, and they're technically sound. They're involved in the geology. If you're going to try to find a mine, why not partner with the guys that know how to mine? It's a great partnership. So the investment thesis for a junior miner. Well, Rob, you're up 1,000%. I missed it, right? But one thing we learned in the Yukon is the discovery cycle really is at least 3 to 5 years long. So in the first year, you catch the tiger by the tail, and you maybe don't really even understand what you have, right? And then the seasonality is a big thing. And people say, well, seasonality affects you and it's negative. In fact, it's better because our team has a few months to assimilate the data, acquire new interpretations, and then come back in year 2 with a better understanding of what we're looking at. And that was the case at Coffee. Year 1, we made 2 discoveries. We went back, scratched our head, tried to figure out what it was. Year 2, we came back and made 10 more discoveries. So year 2 is really the critical part. Year 3 is when you start framing resources, because guys like Peter and Michael are going to say, great, Rob, you guys are hitting all these great big holes, but show some geometry, right? So when you're in the discovery phase, you have to show geometry that these things can become deposits, and you can keep finding them. Everybody's worried about going off the cliff on the Lassonde curve. If you've got a good footprint and you've got a good scale, continue to make discoveries, that Lassonde curve is going to be in your favor. So how did we crack the code this year, this winter, that's going to help us have more discoveries in 2026? And again, it's the recognition of the structural geology. The grade here, these holes from last year, the grade is exceptional. And it's because of that focusing in those structures. We found that on the surface, although a lot of this stuff weathers out and it's crumbly, there's hyperspectral or satellite imagery that helps us fingerprint the more favorable fault zones to drill. Looking at the liniment study, it's not a coincidence that our best gold occurrences occur where there's more structural complexity, right? So it's really helping us focus in and decide which targets are more priority. Now, obviously, our best drill hole last year was 44 meters at 14 grams gold and 2% copper. The best copper hole and the best gold hole I've ever been a part of. And right now, the objective, the first holes in May, will be to expand that along trend and at depth, very systematically. And it's a target-rich environment, and these structures are all parallel to each other. So after that, a second drill, a systematic evaluation of those regional structures, making sure we're not missing anything. So with that, thank you for your attention, and please stop by the core shack and take a look at some of our rocks. Thanks.
Great.
Okay, I'm going to start off by asking some geology questions, partly out of ignorance. So, you have this copper gold system, you've got structures, you've commented on the structure, you've commented on how you've targeted things. I'm just looking at the geometry of it. What's your what's your year 2? How are you trying to make this thing bigger? Because you've already established that you've got grade and you've got, how do we get to the scale part? What's your next step?
Yeah, so big deposits are hosted in big structures, and one of the things is that you have to have the envelope. So our priority targeting is on the structures that have the best strike length, that are coincident with our mineral chemistry or our surface showings or our satellite jarosite or hematite anomalies. We're lucky enough that the surface footprint here, there's dozens of surface showings, outcrop, some talus, some chip samples that all run greater than an ounce. And most of them have never been looked at twice. Someone takes a sample that runs 42 grams, no one's ever visited it since. But systematically we know that we're looking at near vertical fault zones, and there's very good evidence for that. So it's filling out a longitudinal and understanding what the rock type differences are as well. So it's a systematic approach. I think one of the mistakes I see, I'm tempted to move in, is you want to thread the needle and you want to always go for the high grade. But I think people will be more impressed with the scale of the system with consistent hits in a long section that makes sense, rather than just continually trying to hit the bullseye.
And do you have the geological understanding to be able to figure out where those bulkier zones might be? Or
Yeah, so luckily we had some drill intercepts this year, and so what we've done over the winter time is we extrapolate those to surface, and then we say, okay, what does the surface expression look like directly above where we're drilling? And sometimes, again, there's some satellite imagery that suggests that there's a structure there. LiDAR, simple things like tools even we didn't have 20 years ago to do a simple structural analysis. Very much, like getting into the 3D data, looking at the chemistry of the zones to try to figure out where the better grade is going to be. So there's going to be a plunge in here. There's always sweet spots, right? So we want to make sure we understand what that is. And there's enough information on outcrop in drill core with our drill photos and our chemistry to lead us to a very systematic approach. So year 2 is important for 2 things. One is, flesh out the more discoveries, but get to your point, prove that they're not just flash in the pans.
And do you expect that the whole thing remains a copper-gold or gold-copper system as you've drilled it so far, or do you expect that to change as you
Good question.
explore the area?
One of the things that I found about big deposits is they're complex. And usually you get multiple mineralizing events. So even if you go to Timmins or something, for example, one deposit here looks different than the other one. And when you're in a good structure that goes deep, different things take the elevator up at different times. We're not entirely sure the copper and gold are intimate.
Right.
Part of our mind is thinking that they're separate. Copper came in and then gold came in, and they're taking advantage of the same fault zone. But other times you see gold and copper together. So we're not exactly confident on, we've got holes that are extremely rich in gold, poor in copper, and the other way around. So the metallurgy on that is still an unknown. But our target is definitely the high-grade gold, and notoriously, that zone we drilled this year, the upper part of it runs 4 to 5% copper and 5 grams gold. We've never seen anything like that on the property. Before it was bismuth, tellurium, IRGS type signature, and then all of a sudden we rip into this 20-meter wide massive sulfide zone that is unlike anything I've seen. Chalcopyrite, native copper, that consistently runs 3 to 5 grams gold. So, so what are we going to find next year, right? There's a lot of unknowns, and when you're at the spear point in the exploration, a good sign is finding those things, not necessarily understanding where they came from in the Earth's crust, but knowing why they're here now, right?
Right.
Yeah, I've had the advantage of being site, and this is not hosting the intrusion, the main discovery, but it is rich in bismuth tellurium, so it's intrusive related, or at least that's the thinking. Rob, is it going to be open pit, underground, kind of, to Peter's question, or is it too early to determine?
Throughput.
Optionality, again, so getting back to the point of being very picky with your project at an early phase is if you're, the more runway you have earlier on, the better. right? Certainly high-grade gold. I mean, you know, look at Nunavut, like Meliadine and Meadowbank and Goose Lake are proving that 3, 5, 7 gram open pits are good in Canada, right? So, you know, my job is just to find it and put some geometry on it and let the smart folks figure out the mining.
Very good. We're gonna kind of go into broader questions now for all the CEOs, and maybe ask that the answers be fairly brief. We've got a bit of time.
Why'd you look at me when you said that?
Sorry, Sandy. Maybe starting with Rob, how about the Eagle sales process? How does that impact you?
You know, I mean, we had to answer a lot of questions early on. There's a lot of uncertainty with, you know, things happen that are largely beyond our control. You know, like we use like some facilities like that where we camp out at the old Brewery Creek camp, you know, which has been good for us. But by and large, I would say, you know, early on, investors were, you know, the investor certainty, I think, has become more confident in Yukon. But directly, it doesn't really affect us.
Tim?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're probably the most similar in terms of a project to Eagle. We're an open pit heap leach operation, but I think the fact that you know, there was a very thorough investigation into the Eagle, and I think people understand what happened. I think Newmont, before we bought the project, responded really, really well to the findings, and even, you know, Newmont doesn't, you know, they're sort of a gold-plated standard in terms of how they construct and engineers things. So I think those concerns are less. Obviously, it'd be nice if that Eagle sale process would wrap up. I know that it's already, you know, gone through a couple of deadlines and in the rearview mirror, but yeah, I'm hoping that gets wrapped up, and I think that'll just help move things along in the Yukon.
I mean, it hasn't hurt that the Trondheim has been very vocal about wanting your project to go ahead.
I mean, that's our main First Nation, and they've been extremely vocal in supporting the project.
Okay, Sandeep? Given that you have a heap leach at the front end.
Yeah, we have a small component of our project is heap leach. Small component for us, but not small in the absolute. So look, it definitely hurt us. Summer of 2024 kind of stymied a lot of positive momentum, which is, you know, normal, I guess, given the incident. Feel like that's behind us now. To Tim's point, it'd be nice to get resolution. I think the independent review was very helpful to crystallize what to learn from that and how to move it forward. We've been pretty clear that you know, we're comfortable with those findings, and a lot of them were kind of already baked into the way we were planning or the heap leach component of our project. So, and in fact, the main author of that report is a gentleman by the name of Mark Smith. He's now joined our board subsequently, so have access to that brain in the room. So yeah, it'd be nice to get some resolution. You know, I think when I think about the Yukon, you know, we've had and are having tremendous successes from an exploration perspective. We need more successes from a mining perspective. And I think there's some good candidates, you know, Tim leading the charge next. You know, we're behind that, Tara as well. But I think that's what we need to kind of focus on, is getting some wins racked up. And they will come, because I think there's some really, really good projects being backed by good companies that will garner interest from even bigger companies. So I think that's the future of the Yukon.
Yeah. Tara?
So it used to be that everybody thought they were our natural acquirer, and I think we've now got to that scale where we don't need them anymore. Whoever buys that, I think if they want to mine their Raven deposit, you know, the gold dome there is encapsulated by our claims. So I say they now need us, we don't need them. And I think that, you know, we've got a project that we're advancing very rapidly. And to Peter's point about the capital costs, one real advantage we have is we've got existing roads, existing power, and very, very moderate topography. So that's why, you know, maybe going at the larger scale, you know, the capital cost might actually surprise people to the positive side.
You will need more power.
We will need more power, but hey, if there's power at our site, we can actually feed back into the Yukon's grid and help, you know, right now the Yukon shuts off power. You know, we might actually have power that could go back into the grid. That is a big advantage for us.
You know, your own power source.
Our own power source. And of course, the other Eagle mine is, we're a mill, right? Our mill project. So that's something that we're continuing to try to change that historic thought about our project.
Okay. Permitting velocity, Peter, you want to start off on just the that being inquired or required in the Yukon, and maybe to the extent, I mean, we're certainly embracing Minister Laking's message and initiatives. I think in Canada, though, analysts are fairly cynical until we see results.
I think it's fair to say that people are broadly cynical about that kind of thing, and I always kind of wonder about, like, it's a question that people ask me all the time, like, and you know, for the companies that I cover in the Yukon and more broadly. But you know, again, it kind of, I was thinking about the number of, I'm going off on a tangent here, but the number of discoveries that have been made and the momentum in the region and so on, and you know, there's a lot happening and a lot of potential for some really great things to happen on the mining front. Right now, you know, you don't have a lot of data points for pointing to something that, you know, has started and gone into, because we don't have that, there aren't that many mines and whatever. So that, anytime you don't have very many data points, I find people just decide that they're going to be skeptical about it just because they don't have anything to kind of point to.
Yeah.
You know, whether that's right or wrong, I mean, that's just kind of the way people are. I do think that, you know, my view of the Yukon, of many jurisdictions that I look at or have been involved in and so on, is, you know, the government has been very vocal in being supportive of mining in a way that you really don't see in a lot of, I mean, you see it more now than you did a few years ago, but, you know, but it feels very supportive broadly, and I think once we get some of these things advanced more, a lot of that stuff will kind of go away.
Yeah, I think I wouldn't mind the panel commenting. I think they were all there. Pierre Lassonde in November at the Geoscience Forum gave the keynote, and out of the gate it was carpe diem. You know, Yukon, seize the day, kind of grow up, get beyond the exploration side, and to Sandeep's point, need some wins on the board as far as mines. Maybe we could start with Tara and just comment on that dynamic, because the Yukon's been a great spot for investors to make money in exploration, but how do we get to the next stage? And is it vis-a-vis fast permitting?
Well, I think we've seen a few steps towards improving the permitting process. I'm encouraged by the new major projects concept. I think, you know, we've also heard greater alignment between YESA and the Water Board. We've seen new appointments to the Water Board of people that actually have, you know, expertise in business and mining. I think that's important, getting the right people in the right places on these boards, and really getting back to where we can find some efficiencies between the environmental assessment and Water Board process. And, you know, we've got some people that are very experienced. Remember, I actually sat on the YESA board, was part of writing the rules, and there are some really good things that I think we can take advantage of to improve that process, how it works, and, you know, use the people that have these big projects. And I think we've got credible people who are doing the science right, who are doing the background work, and having good quality projects go into the process will also make it better. So, you know, there's a new process actually that, you know, the pre-submission engagement process is new at YESA, and that'll probably be, you know, Banyan will be one of the first few that go through that. You know, Western is a panel process, and it's been really, you know, I know they've put a huge amount of effort into the quality of their project proposals, and I think that will also help. So it's a two-way street. Industry's got to do our part, and we've got to get talking to government about what the key things are that they can do. And of course, it has to stay consistent with the legislation, particularly YESA and the Waters Act. But, you know, we are seeing some movement, and I think this new government's shown a commitment to that.
So the new head of the Water Board moves the needle for you?
It's a start,
Okay.
but it does. You know,
Okay.
the fact you've got some new people there, and not just one. You need board members that are going to make decisions and help manage that bureaucracy.
Okay, Sandeep?
Yeah, look, I think, I mean, I've got a lot to say on it, but I remember the stare you gave me. I think we got to walk before we run, to be honest. I think, look, if I'm all for efficiency. There's so much of it to get, but because of the history of the Yukon, longer dated and more recent, I think we need to kind of walk before we run here a little bit and bring people along together and build a social license for these projects, because they're important. They're all really good projects at different stages, but the things that can kind of drive the Yukon, the North, and even Canada for a long time if you get them right. And so the foundation, I think, is important. The other thing I usually tell people is there are faster places to do things, but they're not better places. I think in a bull market, people tend to forget about geopolitical risk until it kind of pops up and reminds you every so often. And we're seeing that, without naming specifics, we're seeing that kind of raise its head in a lot of different places. So, I rather go through perhaps a little bit of a slower process, but then have certainty of tenure and stability and social license thereafter. So I think we can all do things better. I'm buoyed by the fact that maybe this is the first time in my career that the federal government is saying positive things about mining, or things this positive about mining. So those are wins, and I think it's collectively we all have to kind of push these projects forward sensibly and bringing people along, and then once we start racking up wins, then there's no reason the Yukon can't have the next 30 years that BC, Ontario, and Quebec have had for the last 30 years, and really it was just a function of access and spending.
Yeah, it's quite something to see the speed at which the governments are embracing mining, the ads during the Olympics, building the country infrastructure with mining. Tim?
Yeah, look, I think the coffee project, for example, has been in permitting since 2017, and I think we can all agree that's too long. It shouldn't take 10 years to permit a mine, but I think I'm really pleased with some of the initiatives that Minister Laking and his colleagues are embracing and pushing forward, and that's really exciting. And I'd like to see that develop more and move along. But it's a really good start, and we're very encouraged by that. And I think to Sandy Bintera's point, the Yukon has had some problematic issues with mines in the past, and you can't. There's no getting around that. As an industry, I think we have to own that. And so one of the things we really, I think, feel responsibility for is, look, we're probably going to be the next mine in production in the Yukon, and there's a lot of responsibility on us to do it right, to not screw this up, to make sure that this is a positive experience and a valuable experience for not just our shareholders, but for the First Nations communities, for Yukoners as a whole, for the Yukon government, that we demonstrate that, look, you can do this right. This can be a positive impact on the Yukon, and really a win situation for everyone. And I think once you get one good solid win, it's going to clear a pathway for all the other projects that come behind that, because they'll be able to point to that and say, see, look, it can be done properly. There is a way to do this in a responsible and respectful and environmentally friendly way, and that benefits everybody in the Yukon.
Okay, so Rob?
Even as an Explorer Co, we get these questions that, de-risk our investment by finding gold, but also doing consultation. And so we get involved with First Nations early, and so by the time it goes into someone else's hands, that relationship is built. And my advice would be, talk to people directly. First Nations want to be involved in the value chain from the beginning, and that's us. And they don't want to just have the government tell them what to do. They hate government just as much as we do, right? So speak with them, get the agreements together with the stakeholders, and then go to the government and say, we're together collectively here as stakeholders, the issuer, the First Nations, the communities, and then put that permit in front of the government and dare them to deny it.
Why don't we touch on First Nations right now, since you brought it up. Rob, for those that don't know, 11 of 14 First Nations have signed the umbrella agreement, essentially have treaties, rights. 3 have not. There seems to be a lot of momentum happening in the Yukon vis-a-vis the Selkirk being part owners of the Minto mine, Selkirk Copper. Sandeep's, I'm sure, going to comment on some relationships he's built. The Nutshunai, Dunn, and Snowline signing an agreement recently. Fireweed, you already have a very solid agreement. It sounds like impact benefit agreement, Fiorte. So maybe very briefly, because we want to get to the audience with questions, and we'll start again, Rob and through. Just on that First Nations dynamic, do you see a bit of a domino effect, or is it highly asymmetric?
For me, I try to go where I'm wanted. I try, finding gold's hard enough, right? And certainly in Yukon, I found it is receptive, particularly in Dawson, the Trondic-Witchin. They've 125 years of mining history in Yukon, and they've had very little participation. And so that has to change. And they're eager to participate, but I think they want to see it in writing.
Okay, Tim?
Yeah, look, I mean, as anywhere where there are First Nations communities, if the First Nations communities are supportive and on side and you've been respectful with them, you're miles ahead. If they're against you, you're sunk. And so, I think we recognize that from day one. When we made the announcement that we had acquired the coffee project, it was the first day of the Denver Gold Show, but we were in Whitehorse, and we sat down. The very first meeting I had was with the chief and the council of the Toronto-Quechin, and then the next day we drove out to Beaver Creek, Yukon, and met with the chief of White River First Nation, because we recognized that those were the key relationships. More so probably than any other relationship, we needed to have the First Nations on side and convince them that we were going to be good partners and that treat them really as partners and not just as kind of, something to be dealt with, a box to be checked off. So I think that's key.
Okay, Sandeep?
Look, I would echo both of what's been said. I think to kind of add something maybe different or new, it's nice to see empowerment on the First Nation side. You mentioned Selkirk buying Minto Auto receivership. To my knowledge, that's the first and only time First Nation in Canada has bought a mine, then took it public. So that's nice to see that our project sits on Selkirk territory, has other, the road runs through Little Salmon. We have other affected First Nations as well downstream of us, but it's nice to see some of that empowerment on the future of Eagle. It's not one of our affected First Nations directly, but it's nice to see NND kind of at the table and open-minded to that again. So I think the Yukon is different. You have to treat every relationship differently. Our team has been there for a long time, doing the right things for a long time. So that puts us in good stead. Ultimately, Rob kind of mentioned it, but there hasn't been enough that's gone the First Nations way from mining. And we hear that over and over. We hear that about placer mining, to be honest. They don't feel like they've benefited enough. And so, and that's a true story across all of Canada. And we've seen the pendulum swing back, and it should. Our projects do have impacts, and if you can't, you mitigate them as best you can. But you also have to, the impacts you can't mitigate, you have to make sure that there's something on the positive end of the ledger to make up for it. And otherwise, why would they want it? So, so that's a fair conversation to have. We're having it as we speak, and I think there's other people doing a good job on that front as well. But I boil it down to we're dealing with exceptionally smart people. They are empowered. They want to see success and development and positivity in their communities for their citizens. So it's a pretty good foundation to work for if you're treating each other fairly and honestly.
Yeah. And briefly, Tara, and then we're going to go to the audience for questions.
Sure, echoing what you guys have all said about building that relationship, and specifically what we're doing right now. NND has their mining policy, which has MOUs, and of course we're talking to them about all that. Natchanaik First Nation, yeah. And one of the things that we're doing that's really tangible is we're working very closely on everything related to our baseline environmental, our wildlife, all of that, making sure that we're going early, bringing our plans, allowing them to comment, including them as part of that on the ground, which is really important. And of course, then sharing all the data and then adapting it. And that's, helping us make sure that we're doing the right things and the things that are really important to the First Nation. So, and that all of us have to do that as part of our baseline environmental work, but that inclusion from the early days, and of course, we've started it back in 2021, so it's not new. We've got a long history, but we're making sure we're even doing it to a greater extent these days.
Okay, great. Peter, any comments on the First Nations side before we go to the audience?
I think the group's been pretty thorough. So.
Okay. I think there's a roving mic that will come around for any Q&A. Please put up your hand. I think Gary Baschik may have a burning question.
It looks like a burning question.
Just put up your hand,
People
Gary.
could be called out randomly. So.
We can certainly keep on going. We've got lots more to cover, but
there's a question there.
Just put up your hand if you've got a question.
Hi, everyone. Congratulations. Obviously, there's going to be a lot of drilling this year, and just wondering how you're feeling about drill availability and assay turnaround times. We had a major step up in 25, but obviously even more in 26. So how does that looking from your end?
You want to start, Tara?
Sure. Well, we got funded in October, so we've been talking to our drill company, and we actually have drills on site, and we're not going to let them go, and the drill crews too. So that was really important to us to make sure that we secured our drills. Assay labs, we've had some serious conversations with our assay labs, and yes, we're still waiting for results from last year, but remember, we didn't ship them till the middle of December, and then our lab did have a 2-week shutdown over the Christmas holiday to refurbish things as well as give people a break. So, and it's not just you get your assay results and you just instantly put them out. You got to do, with some of those high grade silver, we obviously had some over limits. You know, you got to wait for that and also do the QA QC. But we have had a serious conversation about our expectations around timelines and that they're prepared for our samples, which are probably going to be coming in before the middle of March.
How about you, Rob? Have you locked down your drills, and how many?
We have a drill contract. That was the first thing we did. We were secured for 3 drills. Assay turnaround time. That's an important question for a couple different reasons. One is we're fortunate enough that our mineralization is visual, so we don't have to keep our fingers crossed until the assay lab comes. But we're looking at some innovative ways to kind of get, quicker results or quicker indications that might help us guide our drills a little bit. But yeah, by and large, we've got labs secured. I'm not going to say who it is or what we're doing because then
Tim will use it.
Then someone will want to use it too, right? But assay turnaround becomes a problem in July, August, September. We're drilling early in May, and when you drop your rocks off at the lab in May, they're a lot quicker than they are in September.
Okay, Tim?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think everybody knows that the assay lab backlogs have been, really industry-wide. It's, you can't really pick on one lab. And look, a lot of it is hiring challenges. A lot of the, one of the interesting things, and I have some personal insights into how the labs operate, but one of the, interesting things from the lab's point of view is that a lot of the cutbacks on immigration has actually hit the labs because a lot of those people were working in the labs. And so that's been a, some interesting kind of unintended consequence of some of the policy changes that have been made.
Are you drilling this year?
National level. What's that?
Are you drilling this year?
We are drilling. In fact, we'll have the drills turning in about 2 weeks. And luckily, Newmont had been paying a silly amount of money to store 4 drills at camp for 2 years. So we benefit from that.
Okay, good. Sandeep?
Yeah, look, we're in a bit of a different situation. We already have a massive resource. We've drilled it to reserve category. This year, our work will be more on the geotech side. Excuse me, a little stuffed up at PDAC. So this year our work will be more on the geotech side. There probably is some exploration we need to get back to, but we're going to prioritize the work we need to get through environmental assessment. So a little bit of a different situation than the other panelists. But I think, to Tim's point, it's an industry-wide issue. I think if the Yukon is going to be busy at $5,400 gold today and 620 copper, et cetera, you have to imagine everybody's cashed up to drill industry-wide, so that's going to be a kind of prolonged issue that we'll be talking about.
Get your drill now. Any more questions? Blake Hossack, do you have a question?
Sure.
And then we've got one over here.
Listen, I think you guys have done a phenomenal job. The setup is hugely bullish. We talked about the Franco investment. We've seen some M&A even this morning. Ministers here supporting. We're open for business, so to speak. I'd just be very curious, very quickly, one by one, is there anything specifically that's keeping you up at night? Oil prices are obviously extremely volatile in the moment. Commodity prices are high, but they're volatile. Is there anything, one item that's keeping you up at night that maybe we're not really appreciating as investors? Positive or negative?
Who wants to start?
I could start. I'd say no, not specifically. The benefit of what we have is we're not going through those early days of exploration and trying to zero in on what we have. We know what we have, and we know it matters. We know it's important. Rio Tinto and Mitsubishi came in 2021 and 2023 when commodity prices were significantly lower. Last year I tell people half our project is gold, so half our project got better by $3,000 an ounce last year. So it was just pure torque, and then obviously the dynamic for copper is excellent as well going forward. So for us, it's about letting the project mature, nurturing it through this permitting process, so that the challenges, the risks are really delays. They will come. It's impossible to avoid them. It's the mining sector, but it's how do we manage them? How do we continue to build a social license to get out the other side? So it's more blocking and tackling for us specifically.
Tim, what's keeping you up at night?
Me? Well, I mean, we're probably a little closer to construction than everyone else, so it's really, and given the Yukon and the seasonality and everything else, it's what we're focused on right now is logistics. Just making sure that, I sort of tell people that our project is going to be 80% logistics and 20% actual execution, because if you have to be set up and everything has to be in place, I mean, you don't want to get up there and find, oh, we forgot to order something and now it's a year lead time on it, but it's winter and so we can't, that's going to screw us up. So yeah, that's what I think we're focused on right now.
Yeah.
So.
Okay, Rob?
Good question. We've been lucky this year. We're financed in the fall, which took care of a lot of the questions. We have the ability to ramp up next year. The geo hires are coming. I mean, I'm worried about the Leafs making the playoffs, stuff like that. But I'm more eager just to get to work right now.
Okay, and Tara?
And mine's probably people. We've been really staffing up. We think we've a full complement out in the field, but then other key positions that we're hiring, and really thinking through our project and making sure that we've got all the long lead time items and are covered off, and that's been we've been doing lots of deep thinking on that, so it doesn't keep me up necessarily at night, but I definitely think about it. So
And PEA at the end of the year?
second half. And we've got to get our resource update first, because that will include the 2025 drilling, and then we'll be able to do the PEA. So we'll be able to refine that timeline a little bit once we get to that milestone.
Okay.
I might just add to my answer, but this is more broadly like zooming out. And touches on your point. You started by talking about Pierre's speech at Geoscience about seizing the day. My worry as a Canadian is that we don't kind of take full advantage of the moment, if you will. It's fair to say that a lot of the positivity towards mining is a byproduct of what's happening with our friends south of the border. But it's been a wake-up call, I think a much-needed wake-up call.
Is there an urgency need in the bureaucracy of all levels of government?
I mean,
How to get to yes?
Short answer is yes. I would say this, though. It's great that at the top, both in Ottawa and in the Yukon, the message is how do we get these things done?
Yeah.
I would argue that at least federally for too long, bogging things down was not a problem. It was maybe, and now at least the question is, okay, well, why aren't we doing this fast enough, or at least efficiently enough?
Yeah.
And I think, Prime Minister Carney's Major Projects Office, that's a great initiative.
Yeah.
Now it needs to get its legs under it, and it always takes longer than you hope, but that's a phenomenal initiative. So, what Minister Laking was talking about, if we need to understand it better, but something similar as a steward through the Yukon process, the ESSA process, that could be great, or at least, through the water board. So those are good initiatives. They take time after kind of, you got a lot of inertia to overcome, but those are great. And so my hope for us is that we do get some things sorted out, because sadly, I think they're desperately needed. I think we need to kind of get back to what we're good at as a country, which is mining and energy, and because a lot of the rest of it is still going to be slipping backwards for a while.
Is there another question in the audience? We got one from Gary. Okay.
Just took me a while to think about it. A few years ago, the federal government, territorial government announced expenditures to improve the road access in the Yukon. I wonder if you can give us an update on the status of that.
Yeah, I can maybe start
off.
on the Gateway project is what Gary's referring to. So look, good initiative. Some progress was made. The Carmex bypass for us was constructed. That was a good first step. And then the rest of our road is now part of our assessment. So we're assessing the project with the road. You don't need a road if you don't have a project, so it makes sense to do it together. And then once we come out that side, there's still funding available, federal funding available for part of our road redevelopment. So that's good. In the interim, obviously, you've got money sitting in a government pocket. It's going to find uses. So that we've seen other things, other priorities have that kind of money go towards, which is fair enough in some circumstances. So I think it's incumbent on all of us, back to efficiency and speed.
Diplomatically said, are you saying money was earmarked and
again, it's only so long money's going to sit in a government bucket before someone finds a use for it, right? But I think it's incumbent on all of us collectively to get to the starting line so that we can take advantage of that funding, which is still in place for quite a while.
And there
Okay.
is some of that money allocated to the Mayo Road, and I'd
Okay.
like to see that get deployed here and certainly improve that road.
Yeah.
Okay, we promised we'd get everyone out of here at 9.
But I would say this, I mean, just lastly,
Yeah.
a lot of jurisdictions talk about being mining friendly. We're actually seeing dollars put to work, whether it's on the Gateway project, and maybe not exactly how you'd like it, but real dollars committed. Whether it's securing access to Port of
Yeah.
Skagway, whether it's the Grid Connect, where collectively between Ottawa and the Yukon government, that's $53 million taking that to feasibility level.
Yeah.
Like those are real dollars, putting their money where their mouth is.
Okay, wrapping it up, 30 seconds each, bit of a batting practice fastball. Rob, what are you most looking forward to in 2026?
You know what? Just hitting the ground. Our targets are exceptional. There's a number of things I can't wait to see. You'll learn so much on these systems as well when you go through them. We feel that we have a tiger by the tail, and now it's time to get back to work.
Okay, Tim?
Yeah, I think for us, I mean, we're excited to get going this season. We've got a great crew. We've got a lot of work to do. And it's really work that's taking this from what would be really an advanced exploration project to actually something that's about to start construction. So things like building roads, putting camps in, new airstrips and things like that, real tangible things that are starting to shape up into what will become a mine.
Okay. Sandeep?
Look, for us, it's, after years of talking about kind of starting the environmental assessment process, we finally have with the submission in October. That was a big body of work. I think Tara hinted at it earlier, probably the most science that's gone, the most data that's gone towards a project anywhere certainly in the Yukon, maybe in Canada.
494 options for the tailings management facility,
A
landing on one.
lot of science that's gone
Yeah.
behind the project.
Yeah.
And we look forward now, finally, that we've started to stand behind that science
Yeah.
and have those conversations, continue to have them with our affected First Nations, now have them with our regulator. So yeah, that'll be fun to kind of start to take those steps.
Okay, great. Tara?
So for us, our PEA, I think the maiden economics are backstops why Franco paid that much money for effectively a 1% royalty will be important. And then, our drill targets that we have this year, I'm pretty excited about the exploration upside that we have because we have that model and we see it's applicable other places on our property. So yeah, I think it's going to be a pretty fun year. And I love drilling. It's always fun when you're out there and can actually get those quick logs every day. That gets me up in the morning.
Predictive model. Closing thoughts, Peter?
Well, I was going to say I'm going to follow on the excitement of 2026. We've seen, some great discoveries, some projects advance, things moving forward, and I think it's really exciting to have those make progress and get traction and so on, and allow newer things to come in, like your new discovery and so on, and kind of the next generation of stuff to follow on the success of things that we've had so far from some of the other ones.
I want to thank all our panelists for today presenting. I also want to thank partner in crime here, Peter Bell. This is not very often sell-side analysts collaborate, and Peter made the effort to be here today.
We've done it a few times.
So thank you, and I hope everyone enjoyed the breakfast. You're out of here by 9. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.